This meeting is being recorded.
All right. Hello, and thank you for joining us on the EDS Empower Hour. My name is Christy Cox, and we are coming to you for back to school special here in mid-August. As I know in my neighborhood, the school buses were on the streets this morning. So the hot topic right now for parents and many of us, whether it's school or work, we're talking about trying to get accommodations and learning what is available to us. And so I asked my friend, Jess Salyers, who is an OT and an professor at, is it Northern Arizona University?
Yep.
So she's going to come to us both as a parent and a professional and talk to us about school accommodations, share her expertise, and we will be able to share this recording with the EDS community as it's dedicated to kind of those conditions that impact us and our comorbidities. And hopefully there are some great takeaways of things that you can do to set yourself or your student up for success. So Jess, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. Again, thank you for being here with us, and we look forward to learning from you.
Thank you, Christy. I always enjoy being a part of these conversations, as you mentioned, in my positionality as a parent and also as an occupational therapist. We have a lot of ground to cover, and so I'd like to go ahead and get started. The focus of this presentation is how to access accommodations in the United States, focusing mainly around grades K to 12. But towards the end, as time allows, we can expand into disability resources and higher education, and also consider workplace options for those in high school and in college who will be managing a lot.
I'm just muting everybody, so keep going.
So as you can see, I'm an occupational therapist. I teach in the Department of Occupational Therapy at Northern Arizona University. I am going back to school to get an educational doctorate, and my program is grounded in social justice. And so I think it's always important to know the background of the people who are speaking with you, because it makes a difference of the way that we talk about things, our beliefs about things, and probably my most important role is being a mom. These are a few of my core beliefs. I think it's a really important to talk about that it's a human right to engage in occupations that are meaningful. So mainly for this talk, the occupations focus on childhood education and the right to play. But most importantly, it is a human right to be included and belong. So we can do this as a collective, through advocacy, our self-awareness, acceptance, accessing our accommodations and fighting for those rights, and ensuring accountability for those in power. We have three main objectives for this conversation. I'd like for you to be able to access policies and laws that govern accommodations in the United States, and that includes METs, IEPs, 504, and then also chronic condition forms. I would like for you to be able to share 5 universal accommodations that can support kiddos and students with EDS and hypermobility spectrum, and then also learn 5 accommodations that could be applied in college. So I just want to talk about some common themes and needs in K to 12. Um, Let me go back just a second. Sorry about that. So as we kind of unfold this and kind of move forward, I'm going to be sharing based upon my experiences as an OT, and also helping families navigate. Um, so sorry. Can you hear the background noise?
No,
Okay. Okay, good. My dogs have decided to start barking. So
they always
we'll get
do.
So I'm sorry, I got a bit distracted there for a minute. They're getting settled in. They want to be a part of the conversation. They know it's so important. So some common themes and needs within the K to 12 population will come up again and again throughout this. And so as we move forward, when the participants are welcome to chat, Christy, you're welcome to please stop me at any point in time and ask questions. But I do want to just share that the overarching law that is a federal law in the United States is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that supports the provision of the pre-met process, which is RTI, response to intervention or child find, the multidisciplinary education team, which is the MET process. And then when students are found eligible, and the team is in agreement, the IEP is enforced. And if your student is not on an IEP but needs accommodations, the formal way to go about that is through the 504, which is it falls under a different federal law, but it is federally protected. So I've linked within your handouts information from the United States Department of Education so that you can begin to explore how to access those resources in your district. And if you are in a public or a charter school in the United States, they have to follow these laws. And then private schools, uh, like private schools per the law still need to fall under that jurisdiction, but they have varying levels of entrance and access to specialized instruction. So I know some private schools in the state of Arizona specifically opened to serve students with disabilities. And so the way that families interface in Arizona might be a little bit different than how they interface in your state. So, pardon me. There are definitely ways that we can support students who have EDS or hypermobility and the co-occurring conditions, which we often see, which would be POTS and MCAS, and also potentially chronic fatigue in informal ways. And when I say informal, it's not to minimize the importance, it's actually to share how accessible and universal these strategies are. I think really good curriculum design and management of classrooms is universal design that supports all learners. The downside of universal design is it's not formal or legally bound. So it's great if you have a teacher who understands your situation, is willing to partner with you, and give those supports to all in the classroom. But the implementation can change from year to year because if you have a student going to different classrooms, different teachers, or going up a grade, and the teacher doesn't follow in that model, which is very representative like public education in the United States, then those informal supports or universal design would look different in that next grade or that different classroom. And if you would move school districts, there's not like a record to say that your student received these accommodations, um, which if they're on a 504 or an IEP, that follows them to the next district. So as I mentioned earlier, and what we're going to talk about in detail are some of these supports that are formal within schools in the United States. And I'm going to go into each one of these in depth because they're confusing. And when I started practicing in the schools, I had worked in a lot of different settings before that, but the schools are incredibly complicated. And so while I had been in hospitals and while I had been in the NICU, the transition to learn the laws and understand school supports was really difficult. So it might take some like multiple hearing what this is, looking it up. If you're struggling to say what's the difference between an IEP and a 504, like you're not alone. It is a complicated process. So if you have a student who went through the multidisciplinary education team process, which by law you're allowed 60 days for that process to be completed, and they're determined eligible, the team would write or propose to write, they would draft an IEP. All team members have to be in agreement, and the parents are part of that team. So that's a very important consideration. If you're a caregiver, you're a parent, you are part of that process and drafting up the IEP for your student, and you have the right to say this isn't what I want. And that could go different ways then at that point. A 504 is still formal, but you don't have to go through the MET process. Some students come from IEPs and go into a 504. So a 504 is for students who don't have an IEP. And the reason that they don't have to have an IEP is because there's a section within an IEP specific to accommodations. So it's kind of already in your IEP. For students who are on a 504, they don't receive specialized instruction, which you would receive on an IEP. A 504 is accommodations for students to be able to have access to the general education curriculum and not specialized instruction. That's really a big difference. The other important support that's in the United States that I want to talk with you about is the chronic illness plan. Sometimes it's called the plan of care, sometimes it's a chronic illness form, and this is one usually that an outside provider, a medical provider, fills out on behalf of the student for the school. Now, you can have an IEP and a chronic illness form. You can have a 504 and a chronic illness form, or you can just have a chronic illness form as a standalone. We'll talk about each one of those in a little bit more depth. So, an individualized education plan, a student would be found eligible based upon this comprehensive evaluation. And the team can look um, diverse depending on a couple of factors. One is the state laws of who can be a case manager. So, who's taking the lead on the case? In our state, Arizona, it is the school psychologist or the speech language pathologist. And the OTs are a related service. So, we're part of that evaluation team when the student needs it. I will say that there are often times when I'm in a school district, I'm the one who's observing the students in the classroom, or I've been referred to look at a kiddo in third or fourth grade because of handwriting or a grasp or maybe some other sort of visual motor consideration. And I know what hypermobility is and I can see it right away. And then I go to the school psychologist and we start the process if the family is open to that, to start getting the student services and supports. As we know, the average age of diagnosis for hypermobility is usually not this population. And so the more that we can have therapists and teachers and parents and nurses and physical therapists, everybody more aware of the signs and symptoms, and when it becomes really important to screen and look for this, I think the better we're going to be at supporting students with hypermobility. But if a student is put on an IEP or they are, provided with an IEP, I should say, the accommodations are put in place to help remove barriers. And this could include modifications to testing, like state testing. There have been some students with hypermobility who have had a flare up around the time of state testing or a hospital admission at the time of state testing. And we are asked as the service providers by either the superintendent, sometimes it's the principal, whether we think the student should be sitting for this test. And I say absolutely not. There's no way that we need to stress this student at this time. And so you have the right to have those conversations for sure. Or it could say, this modification would to the state test would, they need in a small environment. They need a visual blocking of sensory, they need a one-to-one, or they need testing with a familiar person and taking breaks as they need, maybe positional changes. Um, and the IEP allows access to therapy services when it's indicated. Um, and again, keeping those parameters in place to help students stay in their least restrictive environment. So they're most inclusive with their peers, but getting the support at the moments that they need. So there are different levels of um, IEP categorization, and it has to do with the number of minutes they would be sort of outside of class or with peers in their generalized instruction. We won't go into those details, but if you have questions about it, my information's at the end, and I'm always happy to keep talking about this. So, if you have a student who has hypermobility, generally speaking, because there are 13 categories of eligibility per IDEA, the areas of eligibility that I see the most are specific learning disability, or SLD. There are 3 areas that a student would qualify, and I don't like to use that word, but I think for the purpose of this, it's kind of the easiest way to describe. There's a cutoff that students would need to have in order for us to see, like, there are definitely some learning gaps um, in these areas. So they could qualify under the category of SLD just in one area. So it's reading, or it could be reading and math, or just writing, or reading, writing, and math. You don't have to qualify in all 3 to have this eligibility. It could be one, or it could be all. I will say that due to the considerations of convergence insufficiency, a lot of visual fatigue, and also then with handwriting, and I tend to see students who have this eligibility in all 3 areas. Also, as we know, co-occurring with EDS is a higher prevalence of neurodiversity. And so autism is a category of eligibility under IDEA. And so sometimes the eligibility is determined as autism. Sometimes it is determined in the school. It may not mean that the outside medical providers have this, they use a different criterion. So sometimes our students have this eligibility under IDEA, and they may not have a medical diagnosis from a provider. The other most likely eligibility category you would see for our kiddos that have hypermobility is other health impairment. And that's a really broad topic, and it's a really robust category. And that could be for considerations due to these. I've seen all 3 of these specifically: attention deficit or hyperactivity disorder, psychological considerations like extreme OCD. That's the thing that's maybe interfering or interrupting. Those intrusive thoughts are preventing them from being able to read, not the actual physicality or learning mechanism of reading, or anxiety. Also, potentially some memory, because of flare-ups and just not feeling well, and the variability, as we know, could cause brain fog and fatigue. That's a very real thing. Um, and so I feel like these are the 3 categories we would be most familiar with for an IEP for a student that has hypermobility. Every 3 years by law, at least every 3 years, a reevaluation from the team needs to occur to get updated information. And I think that's really important because kids developmentally change. And also with this broad spectrum of considerations, there are just natural changes when children develop over time. And so the reevaluation occurs every 3 years to redetermine that eligibility, but the IEP has to be updated at least once a year. It could be updated before that with an amendment. And I do see this happening, and I sometimes advocate for this to happen because students can have changes that we need to make updates that impact them tomorrow, and we're not waiting until next year. We really need to support them and have that formal process in place for them, today. IEPs can include chronic illness or medical information. It definitely there's a place for background information, outside reports, and I think this is important. And the reason I feel like it's important to have an IEP and a chronic illness plan is because your teachers don't have access to chronic illness forms. Your nurse does, your medical assistant does. Your teacher has access to the IEP. They are given the IEP. So if you have a student who has a need to have increased salt, increased hydration at the table. They need to have flexible seating and alternate positions. They need to be laying down in a recumbent position sometimes. They need to have breaks and go to the nurse. If it's not in the IEP, sometimes the nurse does not, or I'm sorry, the teacher would not know, or what to do if there's a flare up. Or how do we know if the student is a bit tachycardic? What do we do with that? And so any teacher that I've worked with prefers to have medical information provided in this way. Um, and I think um, it's a wise decision. Some families don't prefer that. So it really is your family's choice. Um, but I think it's worth talking about then if the teacher doesn't get the information this way, how does the teacher help your child during the day? And then once a student is on an IEP, by law, they don't really need a 504 because the IEP includes that. It encompasses those accommodations. But I have had families that were on a 504 transition to an IEP and uh, and they just need a little bit of support because the trust might be broken between the school and the family and they ask for both for a period of time. So we would just update the 504 to match the accommodations that are on the IEP until they're feeling a little bit more safe and secure and supported. Um, and then as time goes on, usually what we find is they're like, okay, I'm really okay with the IEP. They say the same things. But as we know, our families go through trauma as well. And sometimes our trust can be broken. And so it's not unfamiliar that that might happen. I also find that that happens from an IEP to a 504. There's a lot of fear around now what? What will happen if? And so I think knowing the law is really important and adhering to these necessary supports ensures that trust and open communication. So before I talk about 504s, I do want to just mention the chronic illness plan or the plan of care. Public schools in our area, K to 12 districts have to have not a registered nurse anymore. It used to be that every school had to have a registered nurse on site, but I think for cost containment and efficiency, they could have a CNA or a medical assistant that's overseen by a more like district nurse. But in any case, most schools have some type of medical assistant on site who can help support students. And I often would work with our nurses to help families get on plans of care. Every district, at least in Arizona, we don't have a state form. And I even was looking today, a colleague of mine in another state reached out to ask about the laws of Arizona because she's doing some telehealth for us in Arizona. And she was like, tell me about plans of care. What are they like in Arizona? So I was looking it up to make sure like the Department of Education doesn't have a form, and we still don't. So every district has a form, it seems. So if you're looking on their school's website and they don't have a medical form, look for another district and see how your school can adapt to that form because you would want an outside provider, a doctor, a nurse practitioner. Therapists can help give information to it. But basically, what it is it tells the teachers and the team the conditions and what supports the student might need. For example, support with transferring from maybe the wheelchair to a classroom chair, or support with medication, support during those flare ups. What do we do when? Here's how we help. This is what we know works. It also can help to acknowledge the fact that the student will not have the consistent attendance that other students might have. And at least in our state, that does become a consideration, I would say a big deal, because we do have laws governing truancy and tardiness and absentee. There's a percent of days that students are like kind of allowed to have without alerting um, and more investigation. And so having a chronic conditions form allows that flexible scheduling that your student might need. Also says they're going to have therapy appointments or they might be coming in late for from an appointment. We've talked about this a little bit just in terms of some of the things that can be on a chronic illness plan. But I did mention before, I think one of the bigger limitations for kids right now is the underdiagnosis of the condition. And so I really do appreciate talks like this, getting the information out. Certainly now we do have the 2023 diagnostic criteria for pediatric hypermobility to help providers really be able to screen and assess for this because I already am seeing changes. And certainly from my vantage point as a professor, I'm day one talking about EDS, POTS, mast cell, chronic fatigue, and all of the co-occurring considerations, neurodiversity, and psychosocial parameters from peds to adulthood, because my students need to know. We used to think this was so rare, but it's not. And so I do think we're going to see some positive changes for screening. So we'll move on to 504 plans.
Can I
We've
pause you for a second,
Please,
Jess?
yeah,
Quick question. You're talking about the not the IEP, not the 504, but just the chronic illness plan, and that a medical provider would fill that out and send it. Do you happen to know, I mean, like, are there good templates or suggestion? Like, is
yeah,
that part of what you're going to go through later? Because I'm just
yeah,
imagining going to your doctor and going, "Can you write a chronic illness plan?" And then being like,
yeah.
"I
That's an
don't have
excellent
time."
question. Your district should have the template.
Your like school district? Okay.
Yes, your school
Okay.
district, generally speaking. And so if you are at even a smaller charter school in Arizona, I was looking up just random charter schools to see, most of them do have forms. And so you definitely would ask your district. And so what that means is if you have, a nurse, you would go to the nurse's office or you can call in and ask, do you have a chronic conditions or a chronic illness or a plan of care form my child has? Or if you're not sure if they have a nurse at parent night, I would talk to the teacher and say, do you have a nurse? If you don't have a nurse, who can I talk to about a chronic conditions form? Generally speaking, the specialized instruction team at that point would have access to the forms and then if the school doesn't have one, which at this point I say it would be not likely that they don't have one because there's so many pediatric chronic conditions. We're just seeing such a surge in need in our young population. You could easily Google your state chronic conditions plan of care for schools or something like that. That's kind of around the search terms I use today, and just all the district ones popped up.
Perfect.
And so
Thank
then you
you.
could say to to your school, this is the form I found. Is there any way we could use some of this content? And, or if they don't really care, like if they're not really, really,
Responsive. Yeah.
yeah, if they're like, yeah, whatever, whatever you want to do, then I would say research the forms and make one to take to the doctor.
All right.
Because you do
Terrific.
want it to have very important information like, child, date of birth, um, list the diagnoses that are known and what you need in terms of medical care for your child. And sometimes it really is in more of the mental health or psychosocial realm of breaks, reduced stimuli to sensory. If the child is saying, I don't feel good, every time they're going to go do something. Sometimes the team then decides, well, they're just avoiding, they're task avoiding, they are trying to get out of it. It might be that the stress of the task is setting off something internally that the child is feeling, but maybe not able to articulate, like you and I would say, like, this is too overwhelming. And then it ends up in a flare. So things like that, I think, are really important to include, like that the child has full permission at any point in time in the day. And I've had kids do find them. I love to involve kids in developing their 504s. I start like first grade with kids. Tell me what we can do to make it. What do you need? What's been working out great and why? You can interview them and they have the solutions a lot of the times. Like, I just get really tired in so and so's class. I just need a comfy, cozy corner. Or I get really scared. I get really nervous if I just do this sign to my teacher. Some of the teachers have gone on to teach very basic sign language because the kids then can sign something to them, get their attention, and discreetly get the care they need. Or if they need a paraprofessional or they need help because maybe the child isn't safe to walk to the nurse's office, or they're in a wheelchair and they shouldn't be self-propelling and they need some adult to supervise for safety, so that they don't pass out, they don't fall, um, then you can kind of ask for those to be put in place too.
Great. Thanks. I didn't mean to sidetrack you from talking about 504 plans, but that's
No,
great
I think it's
insight.
really important too. I think that was lovely. And so we've talked a bit about 504 plans kind of like sprinkled throughout, but there's a lot of different accommodations to meet specific needs. So as we move forward, the slides are going to get detailed as we go into different considerations, what accommodation might be helpful, why it's helpful, and then what grade or subject. And these are all available to you on your handouts. So I'm not going to read them in depth. And certainly, I think that there's products that could have been, um, embedded in some of these, but I try not to say you have to have this product or you have to have this device, because we all know people are not one size fits all and our kids are not either. And so I don't want to recommend a specific brand when you can DIY something to trial it for, a dollar. Some of the equipment can end up getting very expensive, and usually we can find a workaround that's really just homemade. So, as with some of our kiddos, either they feel pressure to complete the task, or there's just not enough time, I think, for students, especially I think in public education these days, to complete their tests or their assignments for the different reasons. The accommodation could be extended time. So they could have time and a half, or an extra like hour. So if the test is supposed to be 30 minutes, 90 minutes would be time and a half, I think. Or you can do the math.
Mhm.
I feel like it's too late. I don't know that I can do the math right now. And there's no cost to this accommodation, but it allows students to be able to participate and show the mastery of what they're capable of doing, and in a way that lets them thrive and not feel the stress. I said it's relevant to all grades, but it's really all grades where homework and tests are part of the culture. Recently was hanging out with a little boy who just transitioned to first grade. Our students have gone back to school in Arizona by now, and he was very stressed out in first grade at the amount of homework that he was given. So, um, I grew up in the 80s and I just don't remember homework. And so
Me
I
either.
think that you really can start looking at this accommodation very young. Um, we always need to be mindful of flexible seating options. So, I've had students that need a standing desk or a desk that they can stand beside and then sit down, or students who need a floor chair, wall sitting, or even a recumbent, or a cozy corner, where they can lay and then engage with the class. Flexible seating options sometimes are at no cost. You can build floor chairs really out of pool noodles. There's some great videos on it. Um, or you can make a sensory comfort corner with, like, have parents donate their blankets and pillows. They love to do that. It's helpful for all grades. I know some high schools that will put like hammocks in their corners for kids. So it's age appropriate. They don't want these comfy cozy corners like that look like for little kids, but they do still need, and it really does support universal design um, when they have those spaces designed for all students. Preferential seating could be quite helpful, and I've trialed this in different ways for students. Sometimes the student needs to sit by like the front of the class nearest the chalkboard or the smart board. Sometimes they need to sit by a helpful peer or by the teacher. Other times they need to sit closest access to the door because they need to be able to leave the classroom without too much fuss. They don't want to draw attention to themselves. It might mean that they're going to the nurse for their breaks, or it might mean that they're needing to have just some more time. And so that's a no cost solution for these students, and all grades benefit from this accommodation. So of course, if it's a little kiddo, elementary age kiddo, they need to have an adult supervising them. And then if it's an older student who has POTS or any instability at that moment, they either need to be, using a wheelchair for safety or having somebody who's trained and knows how to walk beside them safely. Um, we've talked about the need for hydration and snacks. One of the considerations that I feel like can be overlooked sometimes is how sensitive the nervous systems are of people who have EDS and POTS. And we might say, well, it's just, the bell, it's just the bell changes every 45 minutes, ding, ding. All of us are like, well, we just got used to it, or, oh, it's not a big deal. That auditory input can be really not just distracting. Over time, it really can take a toll on the neuroimmune system and the attentional system of someone. And so I feel like as we get to know our kiddos and observe them and understand their experiences, um, and hear their parents talk about, well, when they were infants, that was the same thing, or, oh, I did that too. It just helps us to really validate their experiences in this sensory world because it's overwhelming. And schools are very multi-sensory places. The school cafeteria, um, even think about like the hallways during class changes, which you may not even want your student to participate in. They might need to leave earlier by 5 minutes or later by 5 minutes to avoid all of that for all the reasons. But just kind of being aware that this sensory experience can be very noxious, and also it can cause a flare up, and it truly can contribute to a chronic a fatigue flare for sure. And so you may want to use sensory strategies, consider alternative smaller schools, consider those half days for those ability to sort of take a minute away from all of the hustle and bustle. Um, and I feel like something that we can't ever understate is just the need to be cool. Those, like, the temperature regulation, the interoception, those sensory systems need careful attention. And so making sure that that students have access to the things that they need to support them to stay healthy is a big deal. So we just talked about this idea of students not tolerating this, classrooms, like large classrooms, but like testing. So you can go to a smaller room. Um, and again, sometimes I excuse them completely from those situations. And I'm also a really big fan of Waldorf education and also Montessori education because just by design, they are reduced stimuli, but also Waldorf particularly is very reduced pressure of um, academics, and students aren't even doing homework until usually grade 4. And state testing for some of our local Waldorf schools is optional. And so um, I think it's neat to understand what options you have in your area. So we did talk a little bit about this idea of students being competent and able to engage in the activities, the assignments, but not having the kind of maybe the bandwidth to do like the whole math sheet. So if you have a math sheet and it has 25 or 20 problems on it, you could have a student demonstrate like a certain percent. So sometimes I would say reduced reduced number of math problems or reduced number of homework by 50%. And so we're seeing that the students are doing like 20, or I'm sorry, 10 problems out of the 20, or whatever the percent is that they agree on. The other thing that I really enjoy is let's be flexible with how they're coming forward with learning. So some of our students might be more verbally competent, or their verbal processing is greater. So maybe they could be sharing out the report orally and having a scribe, or using speech to text, or have them make a video about it. They love to do that. So just letting them explore that and finding ways to be successful is so much fun. As we know, handwriting can be particularly difficult, either from a legibility standpoint, efficiency standpoint, or also with pain, fatigue. And so I do like using the scribe, as I talked about, or even teaching kiddos starting in 3rd grade speech to text if a device is used in their programs. And many of the schools around here start teaching kiddos computers. There's even computer technology standards in kindergarten and 1st grade. So while the minimalist in me kind of cringes about that, for this, I absolutely love it. And I try to get kiddos proficient in that so that they can keep up with their work, feel really good about it, and not take as much toll on their system while they're at school. We talked about like having gestures for students to be able to get their teacher's attention in a discreet way. Talked about the flexibility that's needed sometimes for students who may not be able to tolerate the full day of school and changing positions. So one of the things, as we've talked about a little bit, is just the visual considerations. If they're having like convergence insufficiency, and it's not an acuity issue, so it's not something that corrective lenses would support. It's more like we need to modify the environment, or the work that they're given. So if you can provide screen overlays or slant boards to bring the materials at a different angle, you can also reduce the amount of words that are on a page. I love to just take another piece of paper and cover up all of the extra, because it can get really confusing and distracting for a student to try to read. Sometimes even those early reader books, and certainly those longer chapter books as well. I have been consulted specifically for a school that required their students to wear uniforms. It was just a very cultural thing for this school, but the student did not tolerate, from a sensory perspective, the uniforms. They're really itchy, they're very uncomfortable, and it was causing her skin issues. And then, of course, just a lot of anxiety and discomfort. And so we would work with the school to find a similar brand or a similar type color, but a different kind of fabric. The other thing that's important is allowing students to wear their compressive devices or if they need bracing, um, that is allowed. If you have a school uniform, sometimes the uniform colors and the compression doesn't match, but it's really important that it is part of that chronic illness plan. Here are some additional resources because, of course, as we know, all students, all kiddos are individual. And so we couldn't cover everything in one talk, but there's some great toolkits out there. And so all of these have a wealth of resources for you to continue. And then, of course, remembering to always include the student in solving the problem. Lots of different reasons why that's important. I feel like, although it'd be so fun to take a coffee break, we should probably keep going. I'm looking at the time and I'm like, oh no, Christy, we're gonna get this. We got a lot to cover still about college students with disabilities. And so overall in the United States, there's just a decline of students going to college, period. Higher education is taking a real hit in the number of students who are enrolling in. There are different reasons, and it's trending kind of in the last 5 years, just we see that. However, the percent of students with disabilities going to a 2 or 4 year school has always been less, historically been less than students without disabilities. And there's a lot of systematic reasons for that. But accessibility is a huge and important topic in higher education. And we can leverage access with technology and include those accommodations that came from 504s. If you have a student that had a 504 or an IEP in high school, they can take that documentation to disability resources and it helps them ensure smooth access. IEPs end at graduation in high school. 504s can continue, and usually disability resources will take that information and help to design their learning plan in college. A lot of the accommodations that we've talked about for K to 12 still support students in college. But I do think it's important to talk about just the developmental and then also just medical differences between little kids with EDS and older kids. And so when I say kids, I talk to my grad students and I still call them my kids. So when we're talking about college students, um, because sometimes just going to college can cause a flare. Sometimes students are getting their diagnoses when they're in college and navigating this complicated educational system and also the healthcare system at the same time. Some students may not seek out disability resources, and there's a lot of research. I have a research project right now that I'm studying the lived experiences of OT students with disabilities because many college students with disabilities do not come forward to ask for accommodations out of fear, shame, or stigma. So it goes back to the need for inclusion and compassion and understanding, particularly for this population, because they have sometimes been underserved, underrecognized, medically shamed, and have fought so hard to get to where they are and going to college. They may not want um, to seek out. Um, so it's important for high school students with disabilities looking at colleges. There are so many higher education colleges and universities who have inclusion missions. Look for those places that will love you and see you and support you in your journey because we need you. Um, but I do know students with EDS can have difficulty navigating disability resources due to the complexity of care and nuances of the diagnoses, that it's hard for someone in disability resources to understand the scope of needs. And so if you know somebody who's navigating that, I'm happy to be a resource and also share other resources as well. There are a few national resources, the National Center for College Students with Disabilities, and also Ahead. I love Ahead. I think that they're absolutely wonderful. And we have someone at NAU who is really integrated into Ahead. And I think it's important to talk about the trends for adults with EDS and their level of education, um, because we certainly can see some trends, and it would be important to me to change this so that students are feeling more supported and having more flexibility to be able to go to school to endeavor in something that they love, um, and find employment where they'd like to be.
Yeah, that study that you just quoted there, when I saw that, that was pretty interesting to me. You know that.
Yeah. I
Um,
think for me, I find it heartbreaking. Like in my because I believe that everyone has a right to do the things that they love in life, and for us to have such affordances in our country, we can put those to really good use and support young adults and adults going on to college. And we really need those voices, um, and that coming forward.
yeah.
So, I know we have just a moment or two left, but here are some common accommodations that I see as a professor come through disability resources for students. Extended time, smaller testing room. Sometimes it's a smaller testing room with a proctor, flexible seating, hybrid models, or asking and having permission to join a lecture via Zoom if we're having a student that's in a flare and isn't able to be on campus, um, or for any other kind of reason, um, that they're able to still participate. Use of noise canceling headphones, visual blocks, scribe. I don't see like a physical scribe as much in what I'm doing in college, but I do see students having access to like their tablets or their devices, um, to take notes. Here are some more accommodations for college students, and I meet so many college students with EDS who are in um, a service profession like healthcare or education, and they end up having field work and community placements. And I think that's really important because when students are in our programs at the university, we subscribe to all of the disability resources accommodations that come forward, and also our universal design and um, um, accessibility of our materials. When a student would go into a community or fieldwork placement, those institutional or university accommodations don't translate to the community or fieldwork or rotation, for example. And so it's important for students, if they're going to be saying interning at a school district to become a teacher, that they work with the processes that are in place for that organization. So if it's a hospital, there's HR, and they work with accommodations to ensure that accommodations are carried over. Because what we don't want is for all of these supports to be in place for students in college. They go out to a fieldwork experience or clinical rotation and fail that rotation because they didn't have the accommodations that they needed. Um, so we work with our students, and we're very mission driven for inclusion, to ensure that we're partnering with them as much as possible to advocate and access those accommodations. That's their right. So I don't know, Christy, I want to do a time check with you. If we went over a few minutes, is that okay? Or,
Yeah, I think it's okay. And if people need to drop off or, stop
okay,
watching the recording, that's
okay,
okay.
okay. I would love to be able to just finish. There's a few more slides. I think it's just important. So, any questions so far? I want to pause and just kind of
I
make
have a
sure.
question. I don't know if anybody on here does, but with the current administration and a lot of the changes that they're making to the DEI efforts, I'm sure
Mhm.
this is impactful, but particularly at the college level. Are you
Yeah.
seeing that trickle down yet or no?
So you're asking really important questions, and I think it's wise to have these conversations. And certainly, I am pro DEIJA and proud DEIJA, and won't ever give that up. I think the the interesting, and I say interesting in a very camouflaged way, is that because I'm an occupational therapist, any of the organizations that are like healthcare or educational accrediting bodies. So we have an accrediting body as occupational therapists. Med schools do, speech language pathology schools, PT schools, PA schools, etc. We have accrediting bodies for education. And they're separate than like our national professional organization. They are independent entities outside of government. We as OTs have accrediting standards specific to diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, justice. We have absolutely standards to in social determinants of health and being inclusive of all. And so, because of that, at this time, we go forward with our absolutely go forward with our learning objectives, our assignments, um, at, to that end. I will say we have a wonderful inclusion excellence department at our university. And so we do get information and updates from that director about language and what we can be saying or what would be a pivot or what we can talk about. But inclusion and access and human rights are a part of our conversations. And I don't know, and I wouldn't want to speak for other universities or other programs because the pressure is real and funding is being cut, and there's that is happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead with your presentation.
Yeah, but so far what we know is that whenever those, even say cuts or threats or, um, things are coming out, we've had so much good response from advocacy groups and disability rights, organizations and those national organizations to lobby, to protect those. So far, we haven't seen changes in the law to the end that we still provide that level of care.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move forward with just a little bit of information about how we can support students in high school or students in college, either with their internships or, again, if they're having a part-time employment. They are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and those accommodations are a civil right. And so there are different resources here that are hyperlinked to help from a legal standpoint. Um, and then accommodations, very similar to what would be potentially used in a school, modifying the responsibilities, providing supportive personnel, flexible scheduling, being able to have time for self care, and providing the technology to leverage workplace tasks and responsibilities. So these are seen as both facilitators and barriers as factors to inclusion and access. There's a nice study by Wong and colleagues, just a 2021 article that shared about each of these being both things that would support or could impede individuals with hypermobility and disabilities to participate in the workforce. And I've got that as a reference below if you're interested in checking out the article. Um, these are fantastic additional resources. All of them are hyperlinked for you. I think that Leslie and Wendy's website top notch. And so if you go into Leslie's website, I mean, there's just so much out there. She's brilliant. She's
Yeah.
wonderful,
Yeah.
contributed so much.
Yeah.
And so I think the other thing that I recommend, and even I help students navigate accommodations when we send them to fieldwork. We often will go to JAN, the Job Accommodation Network website, because
Hmm.
there are a lot of disabilities and there are a lot of conditions, and that will help you navigate. How do you write a letter? How do I know what I might need in this company or with my disability? I think if you are in healthcare and or a healthcare work student, you would really be quite happy to be connected to Docs with Disabilities and the Disability in Medicine Mutual Mentorship. You don't have to be an MD. You could be an allied health PA, PT, OT, RN. I'm sure I'm excluding some professions, and I really don't mean to. This is an incredibly inclusive group of people. And I think that some of the work that they're doing is just some of the best around the world. And you don't have to have a disability to be a part of it, but you do want to be a disability ally and open to change and understanding and inclusion, because I mean, that's everything. So I just want to close with um, a motto that I have that really grounds me as an occupational therapist, and a framework that I like to use about occupational justice. My references, in case you're interested in finding one of those articles, you're welcome to, or I can email it to you. Just reach out. I do always include, as much as I can, realistic um, images that are representative of diversity and abilities. And I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Jessica.
You're welcome.
Before we wrap up, let me see if anybody that's on here live has any questions. Feel free to go off mute. There's so much information. There may not be a lot of questions. Everybody might be a little in overwhelm, like this is so much great information. If people are wondering, you referenced your slides and them being linkable. This is all going to be shared with the recording and with the resources that are in the chat that I put there.
Yes.
So this is a real toolkit here of both school and work accommodations for everything from K to 12 to, the adulting that we have to do when we get to the work environment and are trying to figure out if we have EDS or some of these comorbidities, like just how to survive it.
Yeah.
So we're getting some thanks in the comments. And I know I'm personally really grateful for your wisdom and your time and being able to share this, and look forward to passing this on to the desperate parents that might be out there trying to figure this out, and making this hopefully a little bit easier.
I
So
will say to all the parents, like, as you do, believe in your child, believe um, that you can advocate and be a partner with their team at the school, and that you're not alone as you're journeying. There are a whole bunch of us that are here and happy to embrace you and help you and support you. So don't feel isolated. We have to be connecting in there for each other.
Yeah, so true. And, really true across the board in the whole
Yeah,
chronic illness community, connecting with one another to fight, loneliness and some of the mental health struggles that come with having an illness in the
yeah,
first place. So, we got a comment that, they appreciate all the suggestions and that they're considering the medical leave of absence for their daughter from high school. And do we have any suggestions for that? I don't know if that's a question you're comfortable answering, but
yeah. Jenna, I wonder if you would mind to email me and maybe we could like talk a little bit more. I could hear a little bit more of what's happening and maybe help you to navigate. Might have to do some researching of your specific district as well and kind of see what's in place, but I'm happy to do that with you.
Okay, sure.
totally
Yep,
fine.
I wrote down your email. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jenna, if you'll just say out loud for the recording your email. I'm sorry, I said Jenna, but I mean Jess.
Oh, sure. It's Jessica, Jessica dot Salyers, my last name S as in Sam, Alyers at NAU dot edu.
Terrific. Thank you for your OT expertise and your parenting compassion and your time away from your kids tonight as you're probably getting ready for like back to school night. Um,
Yes. You
yeah,
are welcome. It's honestly a pleasure. I love seeing you, so thank you for the opportunity.
yeah, thank you so much. And we, like we said, we all got to stick together and,
Yes.
share resources, information, and stay connected. And how I've always said, it's how we're going to get together and get through it.
Yes.
And me personally, after I published the book 3 years ago, it was like I thought I would stop. And, you just keep researching and keep doing the things that you're doing to try to help other people not have it so hard.
Yes.
So I just launched a new website in that spirit of us all coming together. It's called edsjointeffort.com. So you can share that with anybody. It's got all the resources I could manage to scrub together, and it's going to be dynamic and growing. And
I
look
can't
forward
wait
to,
to see it.
yeah. So,
Congratulations. Thank you for that
yeah,
work.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for yours. All right, everybody. Thank you again. Have a great night. Thanks for watching the recording. Stay tuned for the upcoming EDS and Power Hours that are going to have um, the the PT that was referenced earlier. Leslie Russick's going to join us soon, and Jeannie DeBon. And we've got a lot of exciting content to come on Zebras Underground via Substack. So thanks so much. Take care. Bye.
Bye bye.